This is City Focus, the podcast from the League of Oregon Cities, where we explore the issues that matter to cities across Oregon.
Welcome to episode 10 of City Focus. On this episode, I'm joined in the studio by Jim McCauley, the LOC's new legislative director. Jim and I talk about his new role here at the League, his goals for the department and the Intergovernmental Relations team, and the unique perspective he brings to the job. Jim, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Good to be here.
It's good to have you. You're relatively newish and just kind of getting your feet wet and figuring out the lay of the land. So I know you have a background that is an interesting background, well suited to the job that you've been hired to do. So before we get started on some of your goals and things that you'd like to look for, what you'd like your staff to do in 2019, why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about who Jim McCauley is?
Sure. So this is week 3 for me. Yeah. It's been a little bit of a fire hose and getting into the system. But I think good news for me and good news for the membership is that I'm coming from about 10 years of work for Washington County. Okay. And it's I think a proven model that works in terms of the culture that's there at the county, which is really kind of focused on a collaborative type model. Mm-hmm. There's 16 cities that actually have borders either entirely in Washington County or touch. And we have always had a mantra when I've been there of making sure that we didn't get in the way. Okay. And made sure that we were working with the cities. And that, I think, is what I'm able to bring certainly to the League. Prior to Washington County, a couple of different stops for me. So I'm actually a forester by trade. Okay. And I don't think there's but more than maybe 1 or 2 other lobbyists in the entire state that work in Salem that are foresters. So that you bring a unique perspective then to this. Yeah, that is a unique perspective. It's not something, I'll say the political affairs side of things was not something I ever trained for. Mm-hmm. That was been the school of hard knocks for me. So I did what foresters did for kind of half my career. And then I'll say effectively right around the spotted owl listing, I made a shift from the woods side of things and doing, again, like I said, what foresters do to more of a public policy side. Was that a hard transition for you to make? It was, I don't want to say it was hard because it was primarily an analytical type of work, but literally within the first month of my employment, and I was working for Associated Oregon Loggers at the time, and that's a trade group that represents contract logging companies across the state. None are corporate. They're all small, family-owned operations, generations of history with many of them. And literally within the first 3 weeks of my employment for them, I was testifying at a field hearing on a wild and scenic rivers bill of Senator Hatfield at the time, who was obviously Oregon's senior senator along with Senator Packwood. And never done that before, never trained to do that before. So it was kind of like being thrown on a hot skillet. I can imagine that had to have been a little challenging, let's just say that. Very much. Very challenging. So you've got private sector, public sector, a long, long history and a long career of service. So this seems like, to me, it's a good fit for you then to come over and then step into the role as an advocacy role for cities. So now you're going to be leading the Intergovernmental Relations team. That's 4 lobbyists and an assistant researcher, assistant support staff. Yeah. So I'm assuming, you've gotten, the lay of the land and they're filling you with, kind of what their goals are and what they like to do, what they have done. What do you see coming in from a little bit of an outside perspective as some of the goals as we look forward to the full session in 2019 for the legislature? Yeah. So a couple of things. I don't see a huge change from where the priorities are at for the League. I mean, those were established through the balloting process and over the course of the summer. So we're going to stick with the 6 core focus areas. And then there's another 25, 28 plus of other pieces that are all part of our portfolio. But I also think most people understand that, in any given session, you're looking at 3,000 plus bills. Fortunately, they have deadlines through the process, so they start to die at certain points, and that's a good thing. So we're going to be covering the whole morass of everything that is affecting cities. That's effectively the initial screen for us. I think from a goal standpoint, we want to stick with the let cities work. I mean, that really, I think, says it right there. And I think, again, drawing from the experience with the county and how we worked with the cities. It was really a full-on partnership, and I think that's one thing for people to recognize and understand the importance of partnership, because we haven't had, or I'll say local governments collectively, between cities and counties, have not had a full partnership in the legislative process with our state. Executive branch and also with the legislature as well. I think more often than not over the last few sessions, some of the priority pieces of legislation or some of the legislation that was really important to local governments was traded away at the end. And I think my sense is it felt more like we were a constituent as opposed to a equal partner. So when you look at a bill that was related to QBS, which is a qualified base selection process for public contracts, that was traded away within the last week of the 2018 session. And the Comcast Gigabyte bill was a similar thing. Both of those bills I was actively involved with for on part of the county. So that is going to have to be a instrumental focus for us for 2019, is to try to get some kind of a cultural shift with the legislature.
Yeah, it's. I'm hearing that. I hear that in conversations that I've been having with your staff as well, with the lobbyists, as far as what that relationship has been. And I do sense a change and a sort of a willingness to change. I think with the seat at the table, your staff is just well versed. Very much they're advocates for their constituents, which is the cities in this. And so I think it's sounding like with you at the helm that there's a unified message going forward as you all go over to the Capitol to do your business for the cities.
Yeah. I mean, I'm fortunate. I have never had this level of professional staff before to work with. Again, my previous stops, I've been to cover the full spectrum of issues and work with all the resources that are available, the technical resources that were really helpful to it. This time around, I've got 4 experts that cover the full spectrum of issues for cities. Our admin assistant is awesome and is as close to another lobbyist as you could ever get without being called a lobbyist. And my role largely is going to be, I'll say, kind of a mentoring piece of this to make sure that we can be as effective as possible, filling in here and there. And then ultimately, we have to work as a unit. We have to make sure that our entire team, as we go through this, draws from everybody's resources, their own expertise, our own relationships, because we all have, I'll say, a range of really solid relationships. And we got to make sure that in the process of moving any kind of issue through or stopping something from moving through, we'll be able to draw from everybody's work.
Just the word relationships, that just sort of piqued my interest, because that a lot of what it is that we do here at the League, what city governments do, county governments, it is based on relationships. There's a trust level that's there. So if you're saying that, we felt more like a constituent than having a place at the table. Going forward into 2019, is there a sort of a tone shift that we're going to make, or are we just going to kind of be a little bit louder? How does that relationship look as far as our place at the table, and how that may shift over the course of the session?
Right. I think what I'm hopeful is it's part messaging. So again, I think emphasizing whatever we do, that when you even look at a shared services fund type of thing as an example, there is a connection there to the legislature, and they have to, again, recognize that you've got a partnership out there. So anything that affects that revenue is going to have a dramatic impact on those local governments. And I think, so again, part messaging, and I think part of where some of our focus is going to be and how we're going to strategically work on some of these issues. It might look a little bit different on the inside. On the outside, you're probably not going to see much of a difference. Okay, so but I do think what will have to take place is more of a deeper dive long term. And, some of the things that we've talked about internally here in the last week or so, and once session is over, like I said, we'll be able to do a deeper dive on it, is how do we engage membership more effectively with our legislature? And what you have to understand is it's not just a session engagement. It is 12 months out of the year.
I'm really glad you said that, because it's a two-way relationship. It's sort of looking out to the capital, to the broader state, and then it's also looking within to our membership. And one of the things a theme that pops up in conversations I've had with the IGR staff, as well as cities advocating for themselves and being encouraged to advocate for themselves. Your team, maybe your approach to looking inward to the organization with, as far as our membership, how do you see your role in that portion of it, as far as with our members?
Yeah, so a lot of this stuff is somewhat in place before I came on board, so I cannot take any credit for the work that the IGR group has done already, but they've been identifying for the last 6-9 months. I'll say some of the more vocal members, some of the members who are more interested in having a more active role physically in Salem or with their own legislators. So we've identified kind of that database, and we're going to be calling on you. We're going to need your help because you've got the closest touch to your elected official, and much more so than a lobbyist. And I can't tell you how many times I've been lobbying in years past, not just with the county, but for the forest industry. A standard comment coming back from virtually everybody, regardless of the issue, was, how was my mayor going to respond? How is my city council going to respond? And I think by being able to identify essentially an all-star list of members and working on the strategic value of the relationships, we're going to see more integration this session than in years past.
There are issues that are common, whether you're on the eastern side, southern, there are issues that are common. And I think that being able to magnify the voice of cities that have a stake in this just helps the cities out, and to be able to sort of magnify that and then share that message over there.
Right.
It's interesting talking to cities. I have an interview coming up here with a small city that's going to be dealing with, if something changes with third-party building inspections, this is going to affect them directly. So I would imagine, too, that you would want to hear those stories, so that helps your team advocate better if the city of, I was in Wood Village today. If the city of Wood Village has an issue, for you to hear about that issue and kind of put a face on what it looks like, what the laws and rules and regulations that are coming out of the Capitol, what they actually look like when they're implemented over here on the city side. Is that something that you want to hear from cities on? Anecdotes, stories, tell us your tale?
Yeah, without question. That's a shared interest across many of the cities, obviously the much smaller ones. And again, I'll kind of share the experience of working for Washington County. There's no question that we were fortunate and have been fortunate in the decades before me, during my tenure, of having a lot of economic success, growth, and things of that nature. That didn't happen by accident.
Yeah.
It was a lot of hard work that got us to that point. But on issues that had less of an impact to us as a county, but more of an impact on the more rural parts of the state or counties that didn't have the same resources, we were just as much of an advocate for those issues. So on this third party focus area for us, and one of those 6 core priorities, we're going to need help from not just the small cities on this to be able to advocate for it, but for those cities that have got the resources that are a little bit bigger, there's value in this for everybody, because if we can't get this fixed for the smaller folks, that is not going to be helpful for the broader or the more global group. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned earlier, too, talking about this isn't just a session thing. We don't just do business during the session. We've got 12 months out of the year, and there's all kinds of other things going on. So when the session is not in session, for lack of a better term, what are you doing as far as outreach with members? What does your team do when it's not session?
So part of this will be maybe a little new area for the team because I think, quite frankly, they haven't had the opportunity or maybe the time to do it in the past. But something that I have done, and I've always done throughout my 25 plus years of lobbying work, is I get out in between the full session, which is what we're in 19, and the next time. And I get out and see 85, 90% of the entire legislature that is outside of who I was representing. So Washington County, 22 state senators and representatives. There was no reason for me to see them a whole lot. Yeah. So I went to Lakeview. I went to Medford. I was in Klamath Falls. I was in Burns. I was in Ontario. And I think that's something that we're going to do as a team because we don't have a PAC. But what we have is our individual relationships, and we're going to need to build on it because we're going to have to make sure that whether you're a representative on the east side, north end of the state, out of Scappoose or wherever, we want to have those relationships that are across the entire state. And that's one thing that we're definitely going to work towards as a team and do those visits and try to combine those probably with maybe the next slate of elected essentials as an example in the future.
Okay, good. Well, that's I'm glad that you're going to be out there and doing that, because one of the things we tend to get, the nature of our business, I think, is to get a little wonky and in the weeds on some of these things. And a lot of us eat, drink, and sleep policy. So I'm going to shift gears just a little bit and bring a personal touch to this, because I think as you're new to our members, you're new to our staff at this point too. So, you had your resume looked at a lot when you were being interviewed. But what if somebody was looking at your resume, what would they find out about you that isn't on your resume that might be something of interest that you might want to just share with our listeners?
Something that isn't. Well,
what's interesting about you, Jim?
What's interesting? Well, anybody who's in the building who's been here in the last 3 weeks know that I ride a bike with some frequency. I don't ride it from where I live up in Lake Oswego to Salem.
I wondered that.
That's a bit of a ride.
That would take real commitment.
Way too early in the morning to think about doing that. But I try to keep myself somewhat fit. In large part because my main volunteer thing outside of the building or outside of the office is Mount Hood Ski Patrol.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So I've been doing that for a number of years. And anybody who does the lobbying work, we're kind of wired a little bit differently than most.
Yeah.
I think there's a sense of competition and very much need to be challenged. And that was one of the reasons why I got onto Ski Patrol. So I am up there for anybody who skis up at Timberline Lodge pretty much every other weekend until June or July.
Okay, good to know. So if somebody, has a little spill, you could be the one leading them down, and is the rescue toboggan that takes them down?
Yeah. So our the cities have got Let Cities Work. Mount Hood Ski Patrol is essentially you fall, we haul.
I like it. That's perfect. On that note, I'm going to end it right there. I think that's really good to know. I'm so glad that you came in. It's going to be good getting to know you, to see kind of the work that you're going to do with the team and what 2019. I think it's rife with challenges, but I think it's rife with opportunity as well. So I'm very excited to see what you bring to the team and to welcome you to the team and to thank you for taking a few minutes out of your very busy day to come in and talk to us. Once again, I'm talking to the League of Oregon Cities' new legislative director, Jim McCauley. Jim, thank you so much for coming in.
No, thank you very much.
Thanks for listening to this episode of City Focus. Check out the show notes for Jim's email address and be sure to reach out to him and the IGR staff with anecdotes and stories about what's happening in your part of the state. My name is Denise Nanke, and I'm the host and producer of City Focus, the podcast from the League of Oregon Cities. The League is a governmental entity formed to work with our members to help local government better serve the citizens of Oregon. LOC strives to be the go-to place for Oregon cities as a resource hub for advocacy, education, and best practices. While our focus is Oregon and Oregon issues, we realize that we have many issues in common across the country. We hope this podcast will reach beyond the borders of our state to share ideas and solutions. If you have suggestions for topics or comments about this podcast or any of our podcasts, send me an email at cityfocus@orcities.org.